Hello and welcome to the E-Talking podcast from Motion E, the place to go for features on Formula E, electric vehicles and sustainable transport. I'm Stuart Garlick, and with two races in fairly quick succession, this is another podcast looking at the ABB Formula E Championship. In this edition, I'm once again joined by eRacing.net's Conrad O'Keefe to comb over the news from Mexico, to look at those salacious rumours about Nico Hulkenberg and a Formula E test, and to examine the credentials of the drivers stepping in for the upcoming Marrakesh rookie test. We also review the changes planned for the Gen 2 Evo Formula E car, so stay tuned for that. If you'd like to find stories from electric vehicles and electric racing, head on over to motione.org. If you'd like to subscribe for more exclusive content, bop on over to patreon.com and search for Motion E. And now, here's the podcast. Welcome back to the podcast, Conrad. How are you doing? And did you enjoy the Mexico City E-Prix?
I'm doing very well, and the Mexico E-Prix was very, very exciting. One of the most enjoyable I've ever seen. Yeah, enjoyed it a lot.
Absolutely, although Mexico City always does produce at least a decent race. Of course, it's the only purpose-built track on the calendar. Do you feel that contributes to the good racing that we always see at all, or is it just the idiosyncratic nature of the track and the fact that we have that long corner, which is very un-Formula E? What do you think are the characteristics that make it such a good race every time?
Yeah, I don't think it's anything to do with it being the only permanent track on the calendar. It's just simply the layout. It just lends to good racing, and there's always enough action, especially around the stadium section. It's a brilliant part.
Yeah, of course, it's changed immeasurably since the 90s Formula One days, and it's quite a different track now, but that stadium section is something special. I think that there probably isn't a better fan's eye view area on the Formula E calendar, or at least there hasn't been that we've seen so far. And the fact they've brought back the entire Peraltada without that chicane, now that we have the hairpin section at the start of the lap instead, I think it makes a real difference to how you perceive the lap, and that long final corner, simply the strain on the tyres, it brings in another variable for teams to think about, and that makes it more exciting for me at least, and for the people at home, I think, watching.
Yeah. Definitely.
But the stadium section, I guess, could be beaten in terms of great fans' eye views by the indoor home straight, which will be coming up at the London E-Prix. So I guess the key themes from the race, well, the one that I focused on in my article was that Mitch Evans and the Jaguar dominated the race. I mean, utterly dominated. They were a couple of seconds clear at the finish, and really, it seemed like after Mitch got ahead of Lotterer at the first corner, he was able to streak away in the way that he did in the first 10 laps at Santiago, except this time overheating wasn't an issue to worry about. So he was able to race his own race and let the others scrap it out. Why do you think that was, and why do you think Jaguar got that dominance from this race that they weren't able to from Santiago?
Just know that Mexico City was a track that suited their package more than Santiago did, because obviously they were scrapping at the front with Mitch in Santiago and then fell back due to issues. But then in Mexico City, they had such a clean run of it and were able to assert dominance from early on. There wasn't really, once obviously Andre got involved in his incident, there wasn't really any other contender. It was smooth sailing from then. And the Jaguar does seem like a patchy car at the moment, quite streaky in its form, like we've seen from last season, but more capable at the same time. I've not seen a Jaguar. Obviously, we've seen Mitch in a Jaguar win before, but not that convincingly. It was a real standout performance, and there'll be a lot of head scratching going on as to why they weren't able to do that in Santiago.
Well, how much of an issue was the overheating in Santiago? Because Mexico was a circuit which maybe shares one or two characteristics with the Santiago circuit, but the temperature was very different. So whereas in Santiago they were constantly fighting battery overheating and having to lift and coast an awful lot, they didn't seem to have any problem with that in Mexico City. And actually, this is something that James Collado seemed to share, because even though he qualified down in, I think, 16th, 19th, he was able to make up some serious ground during the race. And in fact, if not for a power surge, which is an issue many drivers have had, he would have finished 9th and been top rookie. So Jaguar just found, you're right, a particular streak of form here, but I wonder how much of that is because it was optimal temperature and that car runs well in optimal temperatures.
Yeah, it will have been down to the temperatures, because there isn't much of a difference. Obviously, there's a different track layout, but the Jaguar looks like a car that can be quite steady on most circuits. Not always maximised to the full, but then what Formula E car generally is. But yeah, it will mostly been differences in heating and temperature, because there's not many other variables that have changed so much between Santiago and Mexico City.
So what else can we learn from the race? Well, Andre Lotter, of course, got pole position, the first for Porsche, and it looked, at least until the first corner, like he might also get his first win in Formula E, but he got a slow start off the line. Can we learn anything from qualifying? Obviously, it's incredibly randomised because of the way that the groups are set out, but can we say from qualifying that he's finding some pace in the Porsche, or was it entirely Andre that lap?
It's hard because obviously qualifying lends itself to be quite a lottery. And I mean, we saw it last race with Oliver Turvey managing to sneak into Superpole. It was a heroic effort by Oliver, but with the 333 Neo, does that really get into a Superpole session? If it was a more standardized or similar to F1, say, qualifying session, no. It's if you get into the right group at the right time and you keep it clean. Obviously, it takes a lot of skill to be able to maximize a Formula E car, especially around tight city circuits, but a lot of it is down to timing, and teams can, with the help of their drivers and heroic performances, say, look into Superpole when they wouldn't be expected to get there. And I think it took Andre a heroic effort to be able to stick it on pole position. But I don't think there's that much that can be learned from it unless it's followed up. It has to be fairly consistent over at least the next few races, otherwise it starts to become a flash in the pan. That's something that will probably have to be answered later in the season in regards to Andre, but there's been other drivers where we've asked this same question, and some of them haven't been able to replicate it, which suggests there isn't all that much to learn from qualifying, or especially Superpole.
But still, we can say there's an improvement in the Porsche at least, because during testing, and we've said this before, they looked pretty slow, and in every one of the races there's been something positive for the new team to hold on to. Mercedes as well, we'll come to them in a moment, but probably the driver who can be most relieved by the race result, except for Evans, is Antonio Felix da Costa, who is third in the title race. He's 23 points ahead of his teammate Jean-Eric Vergne, which I'm sure will please him greatly, but you're a real connoisseur of strange tactical decisions. I know that on Twitter you're always talking during F1 races about the peculiar decisions of Mattia Binotto and the Ferrari pit wall. There was a bit of that in the Techeetah decisions during the race, wasn't there?
There definitely was. And it was a very risky decision that Techeetah made during the race when they were deciding who they wanted leading the charge, obviously to make inroads to further steps on the podium. And Antonio Felix da Costa and Jean-Eric Vergne started to trip over each other, and it was all quite a messy situation. I can understand that team orders are very important, and Techeetah are well within their rights to use them. But ultimately, it was a messy series of events that, probably weren't the best application of team orders.
And I could see what they were trying to do. They were trying to play the slipstreaming game by giving both drivers turns in front, but it turned into quite a messy situation, I think, because of the jostling between the drivers for status. So, I mean, if this were, for argument's sake, a cycling team, then of course you'd have lead-out riders changing all the time. But with this being a Formula E team, can you really play that game?
You can, if the drivers play ball, the conditions are right for it, and everything's communicated properly. The problem is, and we've seen this before in the season, not necessarily as a flashpoint of a bad dynamic. I mean, no one can make those kind of assumptions yet, and Vergne and da Costa seem to get along quite well. So there's nothing stemming from there, but two drivers that are wanting to get that place ahead starting to trip over each other because both believe they're the right ones to be able to get there. That detracts from the whole point of the team orders, which is to maximise the result and maximise the performance of whoever's not just the quickest, but, like lifting up the other. And with da Costa and Vergne, they were tripping over each other, and like you say, they were jostling for status. That compromised things.
As far as I'm concerned, there's almost no way that we can't that we can avoid a repeat of this later in the season. So you have two drivers who both believe that they have a shot at the title, because they do, and they're in a team which has historically, for the last two seasons, produced the fastest car. So how do we resolve this? Because obviously Mark Preston doesn't want some kind of Hamilton-Rosberg type explosion between the drivers where they're not talking to each other. So should it be the team boss's job to adjudicate between two incredibly fast drivers, or does he have to wait until mid-season and see if there's a big disparity in points?
They will have to intervene sooner rather than later if that is a concern that they feel is, there's potential for. The moment they start to catch wind of, hey, there might possibly be a bad situation brewing here that results in drivers' relationships with each other absolutely deteriorating, possibly beyond repair, that will be the moment that feet are stamped down. It's just when to call it, because there's some teams that like to make sure they nip everything in the bud straight away, even if they didn't need to, and it causes a bit of unrest in them acting too quickly. And then there's other teams that are willing to let it brew out, see if it sorts itself out, like what Mercedes did. And in some ways you can say that's worked for them. In other ways, because Lewis and Nico's relationship went down the drain, you could say it didn't. It's going to be a very, very tough decision to make as to when to do that, or if they should. But that's a problem that was always bound to be there when you sign Antonio Felix da Costa to partner an already two-time champion in Jean-Eric Vergne, because da Costa was an incredibly seasoned, respected and trophy-laden driver in his own right. They're both titans of Formula E. Even if da Costa doesn't actually have a title yet, he's contended. That was always going to be the case. That we're always going to get a situation like this where there could be flashpoints, not necessarily a bad working relationship, but potential for deterioration, because neither of them are going to back down, because both are winners. It's something that they're going to have to work out, and I'd be surprised if they don't already have plans in place, like for a scenario of this type to commence, because it'd just seem incredibly naive if they didn't, considering the caliber of driver that they had before and kept, and the driver they've just signed.
Well, this is the age-old problem, isn't it? If you're putting together a team and you have enough backing to pay two very good drivers, and you want to make sure that you're in the hunt for the title, do you go for one excellent driver and one decent one, as was the case with Vernon Lotterer, or do you go for two very evenly matched, both potentially equally excellent drivers? It's something that team bosses have obviously, juggled with over the years and struggled with over the years. But, if we look in Formula One, Toto Wolff and at Mercedes and Binotto at Ferrari, they've gone for two different approaches. So Mercedes have a very much number one, number two structure with Hamilton and Bottas, and Ferrari appear to have what's equal number ones now with Vettel and Leclerc. But if you were a team boss for a Formula E team and you knew that your car was going to be a potential winning car, how would you structure it, and how would you put together the team orders?
I'd go for a driver with experience, and I would partner them with a driver that's quite new to Formula E, quite young, quite hungry, who their role isn't really decided yet. They could turn out to be a challenger for the top spot. They could turn out to be a solid number two driver. That's the way I do things, because that way you've got a driver in the second seat who isn't already proven but can prove themselves within the same team and are very unlikely to cause drama. That's the way I do things. I wouldn't do. I would like to choose a team like what Techeetah have done, because it's incredibly brave, and I'd take my hat off to teams that decide to do that. Same as before they knew what Kimi would actually be like on his return, when Ferrari opted with Alonso and Raikkonen, was incredibly brave, and I respected it at the time. And it's something that I'd like to do, but with my thinking cap on, no, I wouldn't take that option.
This is a obviously jalapeno tinted hot take, and I'm not suggesting that this would work in reality, but if you were putting together any of the current Formula E field as teammates, how about the two Olivers? How about Oliver Rowland and Oliver Turvey as teammates? I feel like, as personalities and as driving styles, they complement each other superbly. You've got, the quiet engineer who gets going with things in the background and gets results when the car's on song, and you've got the sort of slightly aggressive driver who's able to, drive almost above his machinery when it's not working. How would you feel about that combination, and would you pick another combination of drivers?
I'd love someone like Oliver Turvey in my team. I think he's absolutely incredible and incredibly underrated. He's always been there. He's had to work with some less than desirable machinery over the seasons, and I'd love to see him in a top car to be able to see what he could do, and I have no doubt he would at least challenge for a title convincingly. Oliver Rowland as well, it's not quite ever gotten going for him like a consistent run, but plenty of pace, bags of talent. He's got years ahead of him, so he can always gather it together. I mean, if I could fashion up a driver lineup right now who I'd want in my team, I'd want Mitch in there. I think, considering he's the one that's not particularly in his prime yet. His prime years are probably still ahead of him.
25 years old.
Better. But I reckon he'll peak around his late 20s.
I agree. I was just saying, it's amazing what he's done for a guy so young.
Yeah, it is incredible. I think he's only 25 and he's able to do that. And not just that, he's got experience with being able to drag a lot of performance out of some Jaguar cars that haven't necessarily been able to fight at the front. Not every Jaguar's been like it has been this season, especially back at the start. I definitely want him leading the team. And then I'd want Maxi Gunter as well, because they're both hungry. They're both going to be jostling for a top, like a top seat in the team, but it's harder to find an established number one than it is when you have a proven champion in the team like Jean-Eric Vergne, who is always going to command that. It's a lineup that would push each other to get going, and I think it'd be incredibly competitive and also manageable.
Yeah. All of the names you've mentioned, fantastic young drivers who could probably anchor the team for another 5 or 6 years, potentially, couldn't they?
Yeah. They've got a lot of years ahead of them, or at least, like a few years if they do eventually decide to leave for different things. Like, they've got enough time to make an impact.
Obviously, the driver who finished third, Sebastian Buemi, seemed very happy with that result after the race. It was his first points of the season, and he had already had the customary "Is his career over?" article from a publication or another. But he proved that he's still there and still among the best drivers. Last season, we saw in many cases Oliver Rowland outdriving Buemi and having better races and getting better results. But although obviously Buemi was the one in the title chase towards the end, this time around it's been Buemi who's had the upper hand. Is there anything in the sort of change of powertrain that perhaps has required Buemi's superior setup knowledge and racecraft to get around it and to fashion out results where maybe the car isn't quite there?
I think that will be an impact. Changes in the Nissan will probably have suited him more this season, explaining why he feels so much more comfortable and able to maximise the package that he has. But I also think it's a confidence thing. He was reeling after season 4, obviously, on the back of missing the penultimate race in season 3 and losing the title agonisingly to Degrassi. That hurt him a lot, and season 4 going winless and looking rather unconvincing. That really put the pressure on, and I think that also affected him in season 5 with Oliver Rowland now snapping at his heels in a way that Nico Prost never really did. In all fairness to Nico, Buemi has had a sterner teammate in Rowland. And I think that now Buemi's worked out, he's solved the Rubik's Cube of the new team that he's in. Well, not new in that he was there when it was Renault, but there's been changes. He's a new team on the face of it to us, but yeah, now that he's worked out how to handle being next to Oliver and how he can counteract what he has to give, and he's also got he's got his feet under the rug with the Gen 2 cars. I think that Buemi magic will start to come back, even if he has been quite inconsistent this season as well. Obviously taking until the 4th race within the 3rd location to record points, but that podium can really be a springboard to bigger and better things for him, and who knows, it might not necessarily be a convincing title challenge, but banking another comfortable top 3 or top 5 like he did, well, it wasn't comfortable, but like he did last season, just to add to that, could help Buemi to get back to his absolute best.
Yeah, just to go down the results as well. Obviously, Jean-Eric Vergne finished 4th and had a reasonable race, although his usable energy was slightly lower than Da Costa's mid-race, hence why he had to lift and coast a lot more. Alexander Sims, I think, surprised a lot of people by getting back up to 5th place from pretty much the back of the grid. We didn't see much of that on the world feed because it wasn't shown, and it even surprised the commentators. But we know what a class act Alexander Sims is, but just makes you wonder where was that lack of pace in qualifying, and why did they suddenly get it back during the race period?
Yeah, it was a incredible job by Alexander Sims, and Pascal Wehrlein also doing a similar drive to ended up ninth, I believe, after Colado's penalty.
He did end
But
up ninth,
it wa-
yeah. And
yeah,
Jerome D'Ambrosio in 10th as well. Who would have predicted a double points finish for Mahindra after they were given, I think it was a 40-place grid penalty for changing gearboxes and also stop-go penalties. I tell you what, I think we already know they're incredible drivers, but to make up that number of positions after a stop-go penalty and starting from the back, amazing stuff.
mm. The timing of the like flags definitely helped Pascal in his drive to ninth to help minimise some of the damage that the drive-through penalty caused. But yeah, it was an impressive drive nonetheless. Absolutely incredible, to be honest. And for
Yeah.
Mahindra, it's like the best that they could have hoped for in terms of damage limitation. It was pretty incredible to see them get both cars in the points after like such a depressing outlook for the race.
Drivers who had a tricky race or perhaps need to change a few things for the next time, well, it seems unfair to pick on Nico Muller because he got into the top 10 with the Dragon and until the I think the fifth lap he was running there, but he just tried to take the car around the outside of turn one, got onto the marbles and went straight into the wall there. It was quite a big accident as well. What was he? I mean, we've seen Dragon drivers before overtry in races because of what we perceived at the time as being pressure on them from the team. But is he just putting himself under pressure because of where he came from in DTM and the fact that he was always up at the front there and he wants to be in Formula E? Is he trying too hard to do too much too quickly, do you think?
It's a valid question to ask about mentality and when you're in a series where you're competing at the front and then you join Formula E and it might not necessarily be the same thing and you're trying to push up to make up the difference. I don't think that's affecting Nico. I think it was just more still getting to grips with a new car and a new series, and those mistakes aren't ironed out yet. They can happen to almost anyone. Not everyone hits the ground running in the same way as others, but there will definitely be frustration. And if there was frustration before, it'll be tenfold now with that crash. And Nico will be the first to look at how he's approaching races and see if there's any changes that he can make. And it'll be interesting to see if he comes back stronger in the next round.
Yeah, and with Brendan Hartley finishing 12th, I beg your pardon, as well in the race. It again was not a good race for Dragon, but I think we can see with that decent qualifying position for Muller that the car does have the pace in the right conditions, and of course any Formula E team can get qualifying right and can have a decent race, but I think it's still possible that we could see a good result for Dragon at some point, isn't it?
Yeah. Dragon are in a... If there's any team that I'd say are kind of in a limbo position this season without a very real target other than just seeing how many points they can bank up without thinking too much about positions, it's Dragon, especially after a messy season 5, and I think it's just finding consistency, and they'll definitely stick by the drivers, definitely stick by Nico Muller and Brendan Hartley. I'm sure they'll give them time in a way that they weren't really doing to Maxi Gunter in season 5. I'm just trying to think about where the next big chances will come for them, because I think they will get another, couple of opportunities, but it will sting going away from Mexico City, obviously with Nico Muller's crash. But I think Muller will be able to bounce back. I think Dragon can. They've got it within them. They just need to, it sounds quite cliche, but just get their heads down and focus on the next race and just make sure that they're not too distracted and that they can hit the ground running, because eventually they will start to run out of races if they're looking to try and get in amongst the upper mid-grid and just they need to try and make sure they're maximising races from here on in, if possible.
I've highlighted two other drivers that perhaps need to change their approach or change something about what they're doing. The one that perhaps has, if you like, the less excuse for needing to do so is Daniel Abt. He's been there since race 1 in season 1, and I don't think anyone could blame him for that qualifying crash, because it was just purely an issue of the powertrain continuing to supply energy to the wheels after he'd pushed the brake pedal. So effectively, he went straight on with no control. It was just a sad outcome for him, because he had to miss a qualifying session when he dearly needed a decent result. And it just sometimes happens this way in motorsport, doesn't it? That you have a driver who really needs the result and can't buy a result. What does Daniel Abt need to do to turn around his season? And given that there's already been a clash between him, Di Grassi, and Santiago, is time running out for him? Given that Lucas is wearing the crown pretty much at Audi at the moment.
Well, that's always been the case in season 1. Lucas has been the clear leader, with greatest respect to Daniel. He's not been on the level of Lucas. But Abt has to make sure he doesn't hit panic stations yet. There's a lot of time left in the season, and that Audi is always a capable package. Like over the course of a season, there might be odd races where they're not really at the front, they're not maximising the potential, but he will get his chances. I think, again, if it sounds cliche, just make sure that he concentrates, believes in his abilities, gets his head down, and focuses on maintaining his confidence and making sure it doesn't get knocked by any bad results or results that aren't desirable to him. He's got the talent. He's proven it. There was at some points in season 3 and season 4, I remember, where he was pushing Lucas quite close, and even in season 5, I mean, he was floating around in the wilderness in regards to the driver standings, but he was able to string together some pretty impressive races. He just needs to make sure he can get back to that, because he's got a few trophies in his back catalogue within Formula E, and he's got a vast amount of experience. This is one of those times where he's got to make the most of anything that he's built up so far and see if it helps him through, obviously the bad patch that he's going through right now. I reckon he can. I reckon he can weather the storm.
Yeah, definitely. I will admit I will admit a significant bias in that Daniel Abt is one of my favourite people in Formula E, and I dearly want him to succeed. It's just that since really the beginning of season 5, it doesn't appear like the wind has been blowing in his direction a lot of the time, and it just doesn't feel like the Gen 2 car suits him in the way that obviously the season 4 Gen 1 car did with those 2 dominant wins. Also, Audi doesn't have the pace this season that they did last season. Obviously, Di Grassi took his first win of the season in Mexico last time around. This time around, they've not been anywhere near to getting a win, so that there hasn't even been the opportunity for Abt to play the team game there. I'm actually looking at the points table now, and I'm seeing that Di Grassi is 5th in the championship with 32 points, only actually 15 points behind Mitch Evans. So are we going to see a classic Di Grassi fight back later in the season where purely through consistency of results he gets to the final race and is in the hunt for it?
The thing with Di Grassi, and the thing that impresses me most about him, is that when he's on the ropes, he focuses on consistency and just making sure he stays in the fight. If he can't throw the punches, he'll make sure he doesn't get punched. And right now, the Audi, although I do think it's a package that will grow stronger in the season, like it usually does, and that it'll be more than capable for him to keep his nose in. He's struggling right now, and he's still able to eke out the maximum from it and get these steady results that might not be entirely pleasing on the eye, but they're building up while other drivers are getting these big results in one race and then DNFing or surfing around the lower regions of the points or outside of it in others. Lucas is being steady, doing what he needs to, and then if the pace arrives later with the development of the car, and suddenly he can start winning races. He can string it together, and he can string together those highlight results that other drivers might be getting already. And then with his consistency from earlier in the season, that keeps him well within the fight, or could even, who knows, he could even end up going into the final race with a lead because of this. And it's always impressive what Lucas manages to do with his cars, because, again, like I say, he just makes sure that he stays within it in a way that some drivers might start to panic. He doesn't.
Yeah, he is incredibly good at getting the most out of average machinery, and I think that's something that actually contributed to his season 3 title win as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, it looked almost done and dusted in favour of Seb, and Lucas kept within it and got the results that he needed to, and just churned it out almost like a machine.
Yeah. Talking about talking about almost like a machine, the machinery of the rumour mill has been ticking round, and Sam Smith, the FE journalist who now writes for therace.com, wrote on that website that he thought, and it was an opinion piece, that Nico Hulkenberg should come to Formula E, and he said that he'd heard rumours around the media centre about, have you heard about the test for Hulkenberg? And he said he then went and did some digging, and it took a full 20 minutes to find out that wasn't happening in the rookie test in Marrakesh, and that was too high profile, but that it might lead to a behind closed doors test with the team for Hulkenberg. Now, given that Neil Jarney hasn't been performing at the level that perhaps Andre Lotterer has, or that Porsche would like him to, and given Hulkenberg's connections with the Porsche factory with whom he won Le Mans, could we see Hulkenberg testing a Porsche behind closed doors, perhaps at Califat anytime soon? And would you say that was a good idea if he did?
Testing is a different story to getting a race seat, or even Nico wanting one. And there's been plenty of occasions where he's not exactly expressed too much fondness for Formula E, or shown that much desire to join the series. But if Porsche did contact him and they said they wanted him in for a test for whatever reason, there's always potential for him to go ahead and do that and maybe be pleasantly surprised. But it's one thing doing a test. I think that there's more than enough chance for Porsche to get him in to do that, or another team. But do I expect to see Nico on a Formula E grid anytime soon, or at any point in time? Not really. I've never had him down as a driver that I'd be too interested in a Formula E opportunity, and would probably prefer a series like IndyCar if he was to ever join a series, or a Toyota program in WEC.
I do certainly think it would be a completely different matter to, say, when Felipe Massa joined, because, I mean, Felipe had already, well, in his own mind, won a Formula One title once. At least he did for the time it took him to cross a main straight. But with Hulkenberg, he's still got a lot to prove in motorsport, and I think maybe one of the reasons he's not seemingly pushed too hard for an FE drive is, well, number one, because there aren't that many teams who can afford to pay the kind of salary he would probably want. But number two, because I think there's probably an anxiety that if he fails in Formula E, people will start to question his reputation as a good driver. Whereas, you know, if Felipe Massa failed, which he hasn't so far at Venturi, then people would have just chalked it off down to experience, you know, because he's had a great F1 career. It's kind of different for a slightly younger driver like Hulkenberg, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess that's a worry. I mean, Nico has always been fairly confident about his abilities, so I don't think that would factor in. Although public perception would change around him if he did struggle in Formula E. I don't think that will bother him too much. He's never been the kind of driver who is too concerned about what other people might think and what opportunities he might or might not get after he's been in a series. I don't really see that being a too large a factor, at least, in his decision making.
It's got to be a difficult thing to be an unemployed racing driver, hasn't it?
Yeah, it'll. It's like when footballers retire or their sitting around, like as a potential free transfer, waiting for a team to contact them, and they're like fishes out of water. They've been brought up, and it's always been like like a single-minded aim to get into a Formula One paddock or possibly somewhere else. And then once they're not there, or once they've been there and then they're suddenly out of it and they see everyone else going about it, some kind of, like intense FOMO, you could say, like fear of missing out. I wouldn't say that Nico has too much of that because, like, as you say, it's also down to him why he doesn't have a seat right now, and he's turned down plenty of offers in order to sit on the sidelines, probably waiting for something else. But it's definitely not ideal. It's not ideal for him or any driver to be out of work.
One more thing to cover as well. The rookie test takes place in Marrakesh after the Marrakesh E-Prix, which is actually only a week and a half away. Exciting. But already some drivers for the rookie test have been announced. Alice Powell will be driving the Envision Virgin Racing car. Nissan Edams have come in with two drivers, Jan Mardenborough and Mitsunori Takaboshi, and Jaguar have Jamie Chadwick. Now, let's begin with Alice Powell. She came in as a guest driver for the I-Pace Trophy debut in Diriyah in 2018, and well, she's had a fantastic career turnaround since then. She finished third in the W Series, and she's now racing full-time in the I-Pace E-Trophy. Can you think of anyone who deserves this rookie test more than Alice Powell? It's fantastic to see, isn't it?
I mean, I'd be very hard-pressed to think of drivers that deserve this break more than just W Series drivers in general. And considering that so many of them were on the ropes before that series was created, and it's given them so many opportunities to show their talents and be trusted by other teams in certain roles. Like with Jamie Chadwick making the step up to being involved with Williams and now Jaguar in Formula E, getting a chance in the driver test. And Alice absolutely deserves her chance to try out Formula E machinery and just get a feel for it as well. And who knows what it could lead to. I mean, there's always potential with these young driver tests for someone to really catch the eye of a team and start to work their way into possible plans for the next season. And it'll be interesting to see if anyone does manage to make it all the way from this to a potential Formula E seat in future.
Yeah, definitely. But Alice Powell has probably had the same kind of arc that Sam Bird almost did. He gave an interview, I think, on the Formula E channel, saying that he was about to take his personal training certificate and quit being a racing driver when Virgin Racing called him about racing in season 1 of Formula E. So Formula E was kind of his career saviour. I think she found the same thing with the I-Pace Trophy and then with W Series, but she was actually she actually had quit being a racing driver. She was a full-time driver coach at a racing school, so great turnaround for her. And really, it's the kind of thing that I think everyone loves to see. Obviously, the winner of W Series, Jamie Chadwick, is stepping into the Jaguar, and after her few laps with a restricted battery and the Neo, this is a completely different experience. This is stepping into a car that's already won and hopefully being given the chance to show some genuine pace. Could we see Chadders in Formula E, if not in Extreme E, anytime soon?
I think so. She's definitely got the talent. I think it's going to be a situation where she decides what she wants to do, because she's got a lot of offers circling around her now, obviously with her W Series win, and if she retains that title for a second time, there is going to be a lot of opportunities to be able to move to plenty of different series. But if her heart's in Formula E, I do see her being able to get a chance, possibly with Dragon or Neo, because they have quite a high turnover of drivers compared to other teams. I think they're most likely her best options. It's whether she decides she wants that seat or maybe a more competitive one in another series, but I definitely hope she tries out Formula E.
she has a lot of time ahead of her. She is, I think she's still 20, so obviously there is no pressure to turn potential into a seat right away. But obviously she's got that junior driver seat with Williams. She's got links with the Neo team, having tested with them, and now she's testing with Jaguar. I have to say, personally, it would be a disappointment if she didn't turn one of those opportunities into a race seat, but absolutely it would not be due to any fault of hers, because, every time she's been given an opportunity, she's taken it with both hands, and I really hope that Jaguar give her as many laps as they can, and, well, let's hope that she tops the timesheets anyway. Nissan E-Dams. Jan Mardenborough is a name that Gran Turismo fans will remember, because way before esports were even popular, he won the Gran Turismo title and was given a drive with the Nissan factory team after that. Since then, he's driven in Le Mans, he's driven in Super GT, I think he's driven in Super Formula as well. Very popular driver and very trusted driver with Nissan as well. How do you see him going in the rookie test?
I think he'll adapt perfectly well to Formula E, in a test. Yeah, and obviously he's had a very interesting move into racing, because he did it through the Gran Turismo competition, and ever since then he's built up a lot of trust with Nissan, and he hasn't really let them down. Particularly, and he's been given a lot of chances with them as well, so that makes it all the more impressive. There's potential for him to get more involved with Nissan E-Dams if they feel like he could, provide something to the team, and that will blossom from this test, I'd imagine. So it'll be interesting to see how he gets on. He's one that I'm very excited about.
Yeah. Another Super GT driver who's been given a chance in the Nissan is Mitsunori Takaboshi, who, apologies for that pronunciation, by the way, any Japanese listeners, but he's been given his first chance in a Formula E car, and the other driver who's been announced for the rookie test, I'm sure that other names will come up later this week, was Joel Eriksson, who is massively popular in DTM. He's kind of the Swedish Max Verstappen as far as fan presence goes. They seem to go crazy for him, and he's going to get a chance in the Dragon, with whom he is reserve driver. So, Gen 2 Evo. This is confusing a lot of people, because Formula E launched concept renderings of the Gen 2 Evo car, which as we know, the season for Season 3 and Season 4, the Gen 1 car, the original Spark Formula E car, was adapted and was made slightly sleeker and different and more rakish. So they've done a similar thing with the Gen 2 car, except what they seem to have done is actually made it look a bit more like a conventional car. So this is the car that will race in seasons 7 and 8 before they changed to a completely new chassis. What did you make of the Gen 2 Evo, and do you prefer the current Gen 2 to the Gen 2 Evo like I do, or did you like it more?
There's parts that I prefer that we have now, and there's parts that I prefer on the Evo car. I'll miss the rear wing. I don't like the Gen 2 Evo's rear wing compared to the ones that we have now, like the little winglets on the sides. It's been inverted on the Evo. Not particularly. I don't know how to feel about the shark fin, because it doesn't look particularly great, but with sponsors maybe put on it, or driver numbers and whatever else, like it was utilized in 2017 in F1. That could be quite interesting, and I'm always a fan of utilizing shark fins like that. The front wing, beautiful on the Evo. I think it's a clear improvement, and everything else about the Evo car I'm in love with. I think it's a great improvement, but just a shame about the rear wing.
there are a lot more distinct parts at the front. It seems, and several people have mentioned this already, so I can't claim original credit for the thought, but it seems like a lot of it's been designed so that if there's an impact, number one, it won't damage the car in front because the nose isn't quite as pointed, and number two, things will come off easily so that there isn't a major disturbance to the race and cars can continue where need be. We have gone from the closed front wheels of the current Gen 2 to a, at least at the top, open wheel situation again. And the shark fin and the inverted rear wing. Given what limited use aerodynamics has in Formula E and how it's how they get their downforce from that diffuser rather than from top of the car, can we assume that that's just to give better signage and positioning to sponsorship?
It's definitely a part of it because obviously you want to maximise, and it's a team interest as well as a sport interest, that the car is not just more suitable for sponsors but also for fans watching, for being able to tell who's who, being able to tell which cars are what. Anything that helps in that is an improvement. I mean, across the board really. But yeah, like you say, most of the aerodynamic benefits are taken from below the car where the diffuser is rather than on top, because aerodynamics are as important in Formula E as they are in other racing series. But there's also the strength of the car and obviously like how strong they want it to be or how they want it to withstand an impact, and that also shapes the decision process as well as your style and where sponsors can go.
Thank you for listening to the E-Talking podcast from Motion E. I've been Stuart Garlick, and you've also been listening to Conrad O'Keefe. After the Marrakesh E-Prix this weekend, we'll look back at that race and also talk to motorsport artist Hayley Mulcahy and motorsport journalist Oprah Segal.